of A.K. Ramanujan. It is a journey spanning millennia, and it connects India to Spain. And who better to explore this extraordinary voyage than Dr. Guillermo Rodriguez Martin? Dr. Martin is the director of Casa de la India in Valladolid, which is celebrated as the twin city of Ahmedabad and is a vibrant culture of Indian culture in Spain. He is not just a cultural ambassador, he is a true pioneer bridging continents through art, literature, and the timeless beauty of ancient Indian tradition. But there is no greater joy to complete a session than a skilled companion. Joining him today is the moderator of this session, Dr. Ishmit Kumar Chaudhary, a professor at the Central University of Gujarat. With her deep expertise in poetics and political thought, I am sure Dr. Chaudhary will bring insightful perspectives to this fascinating discussion. Together, they will explore In Search of Soma, from the Vedas to the poetry of A.K. Ramanujan. So sit back, open your hearts and minds, and prepare to be inspired. Please join me in giving a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Dr. Guillermo Rodriguez Martin and Dr. Ismit Kumar Chaudhary.
Hello? Yeah, right.
Check. Yeah.
It's always good to be hands-free, right? All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome. I think there couldn't be a better ambience than where we are, just in front of Atal Bridge, right, beside the river. And we talk about A.K. Ramanujan. And I think a wonderful moment also to remind you all that all of us have grown up with Ramanujan's one poem, right? Can anybody remember which one? River, right? In the course of our discussion, we'll read it, but because we start with the river, I thought let me invoke A.K. Ramanujan with, his poem River. It was very dear to me. I think we've all read it at different times of our life, in school, then college. On the Google, it was Ermo, right?
That's also fine, no problem.
Yeah, so welcome, Guillermo. I
Yes.
think it's a matter of great pleasure for me to be talking to you today on something which is very dear to my heart, and that is poetry, right? And not just poetry, and we are talking about Ramanujan's poetry. So this book, first and foremost, I think it's a beautiful read. I got it yesterday afternoon, and I could just read it all. Beautiful essays, and one of the essays, the sun,
Yeah.
right? So very, very beautiful essay, and it will, take you to this world of poetry, to this world in which we are all intoxicated. I think today it's going to be really great to talk about Ramanujan. Ramanujan has a connection to Gujarat too. Can you believe it? Right? He spent 8 years in MSU Baroda, right? In the early years when MSU was actually being set up, right? So I feel that he would have been instrumental in setting up the. Ask you, one thing that. What is it that you would talk about from Ramanujan's life, which has perhaps inspired you because you worked on him, on his works, and there is a volume of work, which you've done. So it's not just one book. I mean, it's I think the third or the fourth book, right? So how did you get on to working on Ramanujan? But definitely, I'd like to also talk. I'd like you to speak about his life as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be in Ahmedabad. It's a city I love. It's very dear to me because it's also twinned to my city, which is Valladolid, another difficult word. Valladolid is a city in the heartland of Spain. You know that saying, where the plains are. The British said the rain in Spain is always on the plains, but it's the opposite. They got it wrong. There's no rain at all there. It's very dry, but it's a beautiful heritage city, and that's where Casa de la India is, the India Center. It's a heritage city. We also have a river passing through, and it's twinned with Ahmedabad city since 2017. So if you ever come to Spain, I know Barcelona is great and Seville and Granada, but don't miss Valladolid. So very happy to be here, and thank you so much with a wonderful. Yes, of course. I know Ishmeet is probably easier than Guillermo.
Okay.
Yeah, for the introduction. I see a lot of youngsters here also, and I want to contextualize first the poet who brought me into India and into Indian, the ethos of India, the life and art that I spent in this country is because of this single poet. Who is much more than a poet, and we do a little bit of. We don't have much time. We have 25 minutes, so we have to rush through a lot of topics. The topic is Soma, yes, from the Vedas to the present, but precisely it's important to look at how do we access. When we come to India from another country, which was my case, I was 23 years old. My now wife, then girlfriend, was 19. By the way, she's performing at 8. That's why we have to rush. She's performing on the main stage. When we came overland to this country, searching for our maybe identity, searching for inner truth, searching for a vocation, if you wanted, or to find something in another culture. For her, it was dance. For me, it was literature. It was poetry. I picked up 3-4 books at this bookstore in Godolia in Benares. There was a Spaniard running a bookstore there, which was quite a surprise. And I picked up a few books. He said, no, you should read this, this and this. So I picked up Girish Karnad's Hayavadana and a few other books, and A.K. Ramanujan's Bhakti translation, speaking of Shiva, Hymns for the Drowning, and then 10 Indian English Poets, which is an anthology by Parthasarathi. And the moment I flipped through the pages, of course, they were all beautiful poems. You had Kamala Das, you had Nissim Ezekiel, you had Kolatkar, Giv Patel. Giv Patel is a Gujarati. Yeah. But when I read Ramanujan's poetry, I could feel there were two things. One, there were a lot of layers. His sense of tradition was, and the way he played with mythology was at the same time modernist, but taking it very seriously. And also the way he played with words. He was a linguist. He knew the magic and the tricks of language. Yeah. And I'm not saying this as a metaphor. He used to, in fact, as a child and in his youth, he used to play magic tricks with his family. So for him, language was a way of getting at truth and his own truth. And he was constantly searching for a metaphor to explain how throughout the ages poets, vachikas, were at the same time like shamans, like a medium. When you're a poet, you play a role in society. Of course, it was only in modernist times that it became a mode of self-expression. The Romantics, of course, thought of it differently, if you're students of poetry. And then, of course, we had realism, we had then surrealism, and then we had modernism, which is part of, at a larger sense, surrealism. The modernist stance could be twofold. You had poets that looked at the way T.S. Eliot or Ezra Pound would look at, the world as industrialization, the kind of man against the machine, identity struggle of the modernist, you know that. But that didn't work altogether in India, though a lot of them went that kind of phase. They were looking at their identity in post-independence. I'm talking about 50s, 60s. One mode of expression was irony, you know, the ironical mode, so where you kind of try to play in the British sense, British irony. Some poets did that. Of course, the shadow of Rabindranath Tagore was loomed very large, and there were others like Ramanujan who looked at that, yes, but you had to have a grounding, footing. He used to tell poets, you must read the classics also. Because if you have no grounding, you know, on what is your base? When poets write in their time, they have to write within a tradition, right? If you have Spanish poetry, modernist poetry, they would use their tradition, like Garcia Lorca. He uses the popular romance, you know, romancero, and that's why he came up with this beautiful poetry. Similarly, he thought you can't write poetry in a vacuum. You can't just write about yourself. Of course, there are exceptions that are exceptionally good poets like Kamala Das and Nissim Ezekiel who have a range, Mehrotra, Mahapatra. But Ramanujan, what he showed, and that's why he brought in translations and translation studies, he showed that you can combine both. You can access your tradition. In order to do that, try to read as much as possible. If it's not in your language, you have to translate. And when he said tradition, he didn't mean only the Sanskrit tradition. Yes, it was already there. It was being studied at universities. Remember, A.K. Ramanujan was a poet. He studied English. He taught English first at S.N. Koilon. Then he was teaching also in Madurai. Then he shifted to Dharwad. Then he shifted to Baroda as a professor of English. And then he, made it to the U.S. because he got a scholarship. He wanted to go into linguistics. And there he set up the Center for Dravidian Studies at Chicago University, University of Chicago. Because Milton Singer and others had set up Indological studies only looking at Sanskrit Indology, and he brought in also Dravidian studies. So he said the more diverse, the better. You should have in mind the Margam, the Margi traditions, the Deshim, regional if you want, Tamil or any, from any region, and then the folk, the oral traditions, folk tales, proverbs, vachanas, the unwritten, that is also there. And all of this makes up your tradition. You can, so he said when you pluck an instrument, like the sitar, you have the resonating strings, no? That should resonate in your poetry, all these traditions. You can use it ironically, yes, but engage with your tradition. So, in a nutshell, Ramanujan is a modernist poet who was able to embrace tradition and embraced also mystical traditions like the Bhakti from the south mainly, that is in Kannada, what we call the Kannada Vachanas, also the Tamil Alvars, and the old Sangam tradition, which was not Bhakti, which is pre-Bhakti, and the oral traditions, absorbed it into his work along with all the modernist layers. So you find all these layers in his work. So I think that's enough on his introduction.
And his son also describes that it's a very curious mix of tradition and how he was extremely fascinated by the Western world also.
Yes.
So it's that kind of a curious mix. So he was there in the present with whatever was around him. And Mehrotra very beautifully defines that. He says there's not one Ramanujan. There are many Ramanujans. So would you like to read Mehrotra's poem?
Yeah, great. I do that.
have it here for you.
Oh, you have it there. Yeah. Okay. No, he was he was quite struck when Arun Kolatkar passed away. They found a note among his papers after reading Ramanujan's last published works, and this note, he was quite impressed. I mean, A.K. Ramanujan used to impress his fellow poets because of his range, and he was doing so many things at the same time. So they found a note saying, A.K. Ramanujan is a legion rather than an individual. There's a multitude of Ramanujans, the poet, the translator, the folklorist. There are any number of A.K. Ramanujans. I'm personally acquainted with at least 3 of them and love them all. I don't claim to know them all. I wonder whether the real Ramanujan expresses himself through his translation rather than through his poems, Ramanujan and his doubles. This was from a fellow poet. So now we can come into Soma, maybe, the idea of what's Soma?
So, in fact, it's also like very interesting to see. I have a few PhD students here, and we struggle with the question. People come and ask us, what are you doing in literature? Are you doing PhD in literature? I mean, what is it going to get you? And this question mostly comes from students who are doing research in science. So we often find it difficult to convince them. But here, there is something which I'm going to tell you all, share with you all, where there is hardly any distinction between science and literature. And this is something what Ramanujan was also doing.
Yes.
So we all know about Somras, right? Gujarat is a dry state, but how we loosely translate Somras is with liquor, In fact, the actual idea or the actual drink, if it was there, and it was there, was something oppositional to liquor. It was not alcohol, right? It was something that intoxicated the mind, and the poet could write. And perhaps, the rishis wrote Vedas, in the influence of that Som, which is not as trivial as, how we interpret it. And this is what Ramanujan was actually researching on, that what is that Som? So what plant is it? How is the drink made, right? Is it a mushroom, right? Is it Amanita muscara, right? That is the name of that mushroom, right? What is it? So this book basically is a collection of his poems, which are Som poems, and I think I shouldn't delve into talking about it. It's Mero who should do that.
Yes.
Right?
See, to put this book into context, so here we have a modernist poet. He goes to the US, and it's the 60s. First, he's very much engaged with his own PhD, which he got from the University of Chicago, and he starts to engage with a lot of fellow poets. We have, yes, a writer in exile, but somebody who engages also with contemporary poetry there. And in the late 60s, there was a very strong, we're looking at, this is the hippie movement, the alternative movement in the US. You have, Orlovsky, you have Allen Ginsberg, who came to India looking for the mystic East. For him, his engagement with the idea and notion of Soma was again multi-layered. We have at least, 4 different takes on Soma. One is the Vedic. I'll read a passage from the introduction. The Vedic tradition which is there in the Vedas, that is the, if you want, the mythological take on Soma. The other one is the contemporary today's Soma, which is kind of mundane, and it's perhaps a very simplistic. When people refer to Som, they come up with something intoxicating, simplified. And the other one is, of course, the personal approach, Ramanujan's, and then very famously also Aldous Huxley, which, as you know, in his Brave New World, you have Soma as something you take in and kind of intoxicates you, and it is like, I would say, more than a drug. It's something that to control people, like Soma is to control. Aldous Huxley's take. So what is his personal take on Soma? Now this is very interesting because he was gradually engaged with the mystics. Mystics get in trance. There, for the Alvas, you would have possibly something like possession, like the god or goddess in Bhakti almost possesses the poet, and what you express is the word of, the words of love towards the god or goddess. This is what Bhakti is about. So there's a kind of and in the Vachanas, in the case of the Vachanas, is kripa, it's grace. So it's like you're being possessed as a poet. Poetry as possession, that's one take it is at this. But then he was more and more interested in Soma because in the 1968, a book came out by Wasant saying the divine mushroom of immortality, Soma. It was said that Soma was a mushroom, a new theory, which came up there. And he tried to prove it, and he hired Wendy Doniger to do research on it. There's a whole essay here on how, from the 19th century Orientalist studies, they tried scientifically to prove what Soma was. Of course, it's very difficult, because if it was something that came from Siberia, and then the climate was different in the subtropical area, it couldn't be the same plant. Is it ephedra? Is it cannabis? What is it? But that wasn't really the point for him. The point for him was, it was a metaphor, but he had to test it himself. So he read Huxley, of course. He read The Doors of Perception, and in 1971, when he was in the middle of going through a divorce and a midlife crisis, he was given a bit of mescaline, peyote. In Mexico they use it. So he tried this to see if that would inspire his words. As a creative experiment, it didn't really work, because you can't write under the spell of a drug, so don't try this out. I'm not saying I'm putting this in a historical context, and of course Huxley did it with Timothy Leary, and it was more of a kind of scientific thing, and then there were a lot of musicians doing that, supposedly. But for him, it was just a way of figuring things out. But he did then have lingering visions, which he wrote down. And eventually he had a body of poems he was going to title Soma. He never published them, because then he came up with some other idea, more of Upanishadic idea, a much wider idea, a much more cosmological idea, because after all, Soma, he felt it was too bodily, too physical, and he went into larger issues in second side. So these poems, I found them going through the papers in Chicago. I told Ramanujan sir, look, you have this body of work, which I did when I was doing my PhD, and I came up with journeys. If you want to read this book first, before you read this, because his entire mescaline experience, his diary is in here, where he explains how he experiences, and he writes it down. I don't know how he could manage, under the effect, just still scribbling down. But for months and years, he kept on writing Soma poems. So Soma, as Krishna says in his introduction, what is Soma? It's at once a god, a plant, an exhilarating and euphoric drink made by pressing the plant's juices, some plant, which priests drank for sacrificial rituals. It is also the central figure or myth in the Vedic religion. Of the 1028 hymns of the Rig Veda, 114 are dedicated to Soma. An entire mandala is dedicated to it. In fact, he read also Wendy Doniger's translations, and he made versions of that. We will read one of them. So of the many meanings of Soma, Soma is called the Lord of Speech, generator of hymns, leader of poets, seer among priests. So the Vedas mention Kavis, the poets who compose hymns under the spell of Vach, goddess of speech. The drink inspires poets. It procreates thought. Now, Soma, as the Brahmana state, is truth, prosperity, light. And Sura is untruth, misery, darkness. So it's not something that it's supposed to take you down the wrong direction. And his own perception of what Soma was, and I want to read a poem here, is that it is a metaphor for what the poet feels when he is inspired. So he is demystifying the concept of Soma. As a modernist poet, he is demythologizing it. He is saying that Soma is the ordinary mystery. Writing poetry is a mystery, is an ordinary mystery. And there's a beautiful line where he explains this in an interview with Ayappa Panikar, where he has taken up the whole idea in a brief poem which says, Soma, Soma has no similar, grows ordinary as mystery, ancient familiar, the always here. Because yes, the hymns are ancient, yes, the search for Soma has been going on, but we are still same human beings. There have been poets throughout the ages, the Kavis. We feel the same. It may not be that we require to understand what the scientific substance is, but one thing he was for sure, that it's the ancient familiar, the always here, the ordinary mystery. Because we are all poets, and if we create in an act of, call it inspiration, call it a vocational thing,
Yeah.
call it magic of words. When we write poetry, it connects. And this is something that also Eliot mentioned in tradition as the individual
Right,
talent.
right. And before you read the poem, his son mentions that beneath his Soma poems is a large body of queries. So he's trying to, find a lot of answers. So these poems are not just explanations or anything, but they are themselves many, many questions. Yeah.
Yes. So Soma, when he refers to it, I'm reading a few poems now, is like a trickster. It's like not exactly what Krishna is in the Krishna Bhakti, where there's a bit of that in the Alvars, where you have Maya, the idea of Maya in the Vaishnavite poetry. It's something he explains it because it's not a god as such. It's something that belongs to a tradition that is very, very ancient, and it's a metaphor, as a personal metaphor for him, for everything that stands for the individual struggling poet, when a poet struggles. So I'm going to read a few poems. Is that okay? Yeah? I think we can't talk about poetry without reading poetry. We tend to talk too much, academics, and we need to let the poets speak. So we'll read a few poems. And first of all, this is Soma 121 after Rig Vedas 8.79, because we have to leave a few minutes for interaction.
The questions, yes.
So this is a translation from Rig Veda by Ramanujan, based on a translation by Wendy Doniger. Soma is restless. Grab him, he breaks away. When he moves through the world, as a hand through the cloud, the blind man sees, the lame step forth. You rush at evil, enemy of enemies. Help us. Seek and help us find what we seek, and find and see half what we lost before. Be kind, Soma. Do not confuse our little flowers with your whirl of skills. Do not spear ourselves with light. Do not put us in rage, nor in terror. Help us see, as you see, the evil of the gods in the house. So it's powerful. It was a powerful, very iconic figure in the Rig Vedas. Now this is the translation. Now his own take on Soma. Now we read a poem which was written in the 1970s, so you will notice the tone is ironic also. This is a Ramanujan poem. Soma, Soma is no god, cannot manage a goddess, has no lotus, no water can wet, no third eye, no Lakshmi, more like you or even me. He can churn no sea, burn no forest, turn no mountain. All he can do is lurk in, work on, lies, eyes, ears, fears, and the rest of your 24 senses. But when he does, pore and hair invent a body of pleasure with a vein of pain, a various sack of smells, garbage, skunk, civet, cat, grandma's, armpit, woods that burn and bloom, and other such bearers of myrrh and frankincense. Then jails have icicle rows, like crystal carrots. Slum forsythias have April tongues. The great ladder then has rungs, and the world, our mongoloid baby, flashes wedding rings and on all her 10 fingers, and happiness, and her 13 twisted toes. Soma, Soma has no similar, grows ordinary as mystery, ancient familiar, the always here. Soma is the same as you and you and you. When you make the right mistake, fall to the ground and find your altitude.
And it is here that we see, the bhakti elements actually coming up, and a very, very special, coming together of the physical and the metaphysical, both together in that sense. So how there is elevation also through the mundane, right? So you don't just have to be very pure or elevated, or you don't have to be in that. You just have to be in the journey and just be yourself, and absolutely the beginning and the ending of the poem is, in fact, extremely, absolutely bhakti. It has that bhakti tone in it.
I wouldn't say it's bhakti in that sense. It's the search, because we come to a bhakti poem now. I would say it's a modernist search for truth, where he struggles to find meaning, and maybe he was trying to, in a way, find his own, because he was envious of the mystics. He was envious of them. How can they write such beautiful poetry inspired by, that grace? He can't fully get there. Most modernist poets and 20th century poets, it's very difficult to be mystical. It's difficult. How do you do that? And you envy these amazing poets. He's trying to find his own idiom. And sometimes he actually writes mock poems, like a poem to Lord Murugan, where he kind of tries to struggle, because how do you come to terms with religion in the 50s, in the 60s? How do you come to terms? Some poets find in poetry their own religion. So how do you do that? I think every artist has to find their own truth, and for the artist, their medium is their religion. I would, if you whether it's dance, whether it's poetry, whether it's painting, you kind of get obsessed with that. So it's a bhakti in the sense that language becomes the tools through which you try to find truth.
I think the idea of mocking is also there in Arun Kolatkar and,
of course,
the contemporaries.
Yes.
So one do sees that there. So yeah. You want to read?
Yeah, I would like, because we have to come to an end. Time is over, and we can't let the dancers without their light designer. I'm the light designer for them. So if I'm not there, then they have no light. Maybe they have light, but my light design is better. So there is a very beautiful. I will end with this meta poem. You know what a meta poem is? Is when it's a poem about poetry, and you can do that. The images used to do that. When you are using words on a page, and you're trying to talk about a tree, and the shape of the lines are like trees. The images used to do a lot of meta poems. There are a lot of meta poetry, but here this is a very powerful poem, because what he's doing, it's suddenly when he writes these Soma poems, because a lot of these poems are not fully polished and finished yet. Some of them at the end, if you move on, they become more and more, because I've placed the polished ones at the end, because this is work in progress. I wanted to show work in progress, not just the finished pieces. This is the lab. This is the poet's laboratory. So there's one poem I found where he's thinking about the idea of Soma, and suddenly his own translation of an Alvar poem comes to his mind and possesses him. He stops writing his own poem and suddenly scribbles the translation, which is about a poet being possessed by, in this case, Vishnu, or it's a bhakti poem. So there are two kinds of possessions. The translation is taking over the poet, and at the same time the translator, who had just translated an ancient poem which is about poetry as possession. So I'm going to read the poem, and here you can see in italics when the translation starts. So I will do like this when the translation starts and takes over the poet, the modern poet, with permission of those birds. Soma, I said, is no Shiva, but no, this is not the one, sorry, this one. Because we're talking about Vishnu, we're talking Alvar. See, he compares, Soma to Shiva, to Vishnu, and he has been engaged with both traditions. This is about his relation with the Vaishnavites. So, Soma, I said, is no Vishnu, but Vishnu can place Soma enter the nests of flesh to make them sing. Poets, beware, your life is in danger. The Lord of Gardens is a thief, a cheat, a master of illusions. He came to me, a wizard with words, sneaked into my body, my breath, with bystanders looking on but seeing nothing. He consumed me, life and limb, and filled me, made me over into himself.
Beautiful. In fact, yesterday or some time back, I read a quote which we were discussing, and it was like, when the chapter finishes, the story still continues.
Yes.
I think this book is when the poet's life finishes, the poetry continues.
Yeah, because we forgot to say, A.K. Ramanujan left us in 1993. He was 64 years old, but his legacy continues. And I was very, very happy to talk about this book last month in New York at the Indo-American Arts Council with his son Krishna, and to read with Krishna poems where Ramanujan speaks about his son and grandson and grandson by the son himself. So maybe any questions?
Yeah, any questions?
Any queries, because we're really running out of time here. Yes. Yes, please. Can someone give him a mic?
Yeah, thank you for the beautiful session. My name is Akshay Dave. I would like to know about that 24 senses he talks about. So, as per the tradition, we only know 5.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. There are certain theories also that in some of the writings in the traditional, Tamil tradition in particular, that you have 24 senses. There's a whole theory about this, which is one of his own layers of traditions. I mean, we're talking about a very complex topic here, which has many layers, and his own metaphors can refer to Dravidian, Tamil, or Sanskrit. In this case, there are some theories that state.
Absolutely, and even if you visit a couple of temples in Tamil Nadu, you would find 24 kinds of gods, which are actually representing 24 senses. Yeah.
It's also a metaphor which he uses, because he was very much obsessed with the multiple senses and how the body goes beyond just the 5 senses, which is scientific thing, but it goes beyond.
Yeah, I was thinking he may have provided the list.
No, the list is there.
Yes.
I mean, you just have to delve a little bit into the Dravidian traditions. You'll get the list. Not a problem.
It's there. It's there. But
there.
Yeah.
We don't know, right? I mean, let's accept that. Yeah.
Thank you.
There is a lot of food for thought, and if you're really interested in Ramanujan, there are also the collected essays. I strongly recommend you read Is There an Indian Way of Thinking? That's a beautiful essay, which is the opening essay. I think that's the most discussed essay you will find by Ramanujan on the web also. Is there an Indian way of thinking? He analyzes it from a structuralist point of view. As a scholar, and I hope all of you got a little bit of inspiration out of this. If you want to fetch a book, you're most welcome to do so. I think there's a corner somewhere, or maybe over there, where Crossword has procured some books. There's actually this one and the Journeys, and the one of course, I have to be truthful also to OUP, because these are Penguin books. The one you see in some of the posters outside, which is quite embarrassing to see oneself blown up, but I'm very grateful. There's the one book which is the When Mirrors Are Windows. That's the OUP one. That's the big, thick study on Ramanujan. That's more serious stuff. But these are very easy to read, and 200 and so on pages, which take you on a different journey. So there you are. I'm very thankful for your
It's
very
a pleasure. It's a
insightful
pleasure.
questions.
So we would, I think, close the session with reading of a river.
Yes, please.
Right?
Yes.
And that's where we are. A river in Madurai, city of temples and poets, who sang of cities and temples. Every summer, a river dries to a trickle in the sand, bearing the sand ribs, straw, and women's hair, clogging the water gates at the rusty bars under the bridges with patches of repair all over them, the wet stones glistening like sleepy crocodiles, the dry ones shaven water buffaloes lounging in the sun. The poets only sang of the floods. He was there for a day when they had the floods. People everywhere talked of the inches rising, of the precise number of cobbled steps run over by the water, rising on the bathing places, and the way it carried off 3 village houses, 1 pregnant woman, and a couple of cows, named Gopi and Brinda as usual. The new poets still quoted the old poets, but no one spoke in verse of the pregnant woman drowned, with perhaps twins in her, kicking at the blank walls even before birth. He said, the river has water enough to be poetic about only once a year, and then it carries away in the first half hour 3 village houses, a couple of cows named Gopi and Brinda, and 1 pregnant woman expecting identical twins with no moles on their bodies, with different colored diapers to tell them apart.
Wow, that's a powerful, very poignant poem. And you know what came to my mind when I heard this now after so much, how we suffered the floods now in Spain with climate change?
Yes.
Those images. And it's a very contemporary poem, with climate change. We're going to see, fortunately not in this city, but in other places. So thank you so much for bringing it alive again. An applause for her as well.
Thank you.
And to poetry, to Ike Ramanujan, and to this wonderful audience. I will certainly come back here to the festival and to see all of you and engage more. We don't have much time, but if you really want to experience bhakti, it's happening over there.
Yes, and
on the other side.
His wife is performing, Monica. So please join us. And I want to really especially personally thank all my friends, students who are here. Thank you for coming. And my daughter too.
Thank you, of course. Bravo. Thank you.
Yes.
What a wonderful day it is. I hope you all enjoyed this session as much as me. Being a Tamil, it was very wonderful for me to hear about Alvars, Ramanujan and everything. It was so great. And thank you for this insightful session. And now I request Mr. Sanjay Banerjee of National Book Trust to facilitate the honorarium.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Now we all can move to the cultural stage as the lighting designer is here. We require him there. Please, thank you. Yeah, now we have this book signing session now. Anyone who is interested in the book can buy the book and get it signed.